Hi there, I'm Kristen Rossler. I'm one of the science faculty at Johnson Wales University and also one of the pre-health advisors. And I want to spend some time going over the nitty-gritty of what's involved to do pre-med and gain acceptance into MD or DO schools, especially at Johnson Wales. All right, so if you haven't already, or you don't have a good understanding of what's going to be involved, I will encourage you to watch the overview video that you may have access to. All right, the overview video is going to kind of go through the basic gist of a lot of things I'm going to talk about. And then in this video, I'm going to be talking about more of the nitty gritty. So it's best to watch that one first. Also, hopefully you have access to this document. It's going to be up on a website shortly for Johnson Wales, but also that if you have access to it, it'll just make this a lot more good. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we want to talk about is the specific coursework that's required for being pre-med. All right, and so you can go to this link, and where it's going to take you is to a sheet that kind of looks like this. All right, so as you look at the sheet, you're going to see that the green are required courses, and we'll see how they fit into the Johnson & Wales system. So there's a lot of stuff that's required, and it's, again, because you need to have a very good solid background in the sciences. It doesn't mean you have to major in a science major, but many students do, just because so much coursework is required or suggested. All right, so let's just look at it real quickly. You're going to need a full 2 semesters of biology plus labs. All right, and then you're going to need a full 2 semesters of general chemistry plus labs. And make sure that's general chemistry and not foundations in chemistry. Sometimes there's other courses that are required. So again, if you have one of those, if you are supposed to take foundations in chemistry, just talk to your advisor and your major about instead swapping that out for general chemistry. They'll never have a problem with that. General chemistry is actually a little bit more rigorous, and so that's why. It's going to get you much more prepared for the MCAT. You're also going to need a full 2 semesters of organic chemistry plus labs. And again, not foundations in organic, it's the full-blown real course, because it's going to be, again, more robust, and it's going to get you prepared for the MCAT. You're also going to need 2 full semesters of physics plus labs, and those are the major requirements in terms of the science courses. In addition, one of the things I want to pay attention to are some of the suggested classes. So you're going to see here physiology is highly recommended, as is biochemistry, as is genetics, as is microbiology. So those are all courses that are going to be somewhat on the MCAT, especially I'd say the physiology and the biochemistry. Actually, if I were going to give you, if you're debating about which of these to take, I would say definitely take the physiology and biochemistry, as they're going to be heavily weighted on the MCAT. But I would then, microbiology is, I think, just going to really help you in medical school, because that's one of the harder courses, I think, for a lot of students. And then genetics, of course, is great too, because there's a fair amount of it on the MCAT, but maybe you had actually, some genetics background prior. But anyhow, all 4 of these really are suggested or recommended. There is some variation in this in terms of what schools require. So before you actually apply to medical, a specific medical school, just look over their list. And I have some links that can show you, and you can go to their websites and you can determine what courses they specifically require. Some of the variations that you might see are in these 4 down here. Right. And then also every once in a blue moon, there will be a college that doesn't require organic chemistry too. But in that case, they will require biochemistry. So just look ahead. And if I were you, I would try to take, again, especially all the green courses. And I would try to get in actually physiology and biochemistry. And microbiology. I know that's a lot. Students who are biology majors just know that it's pretty much one-stop shopping. You can do your whole biology major, and you will be able to easily get to all this within the scope of your major. If you're a health science major, you may need to be a little bit more mindful of the courses that you're taking and how they fit into your undergraduate career. So just know that that's something that you just need to be cautious of, and a little bit, you have to be diligent. So that's part of the reason why I want to make this video. If you are other majors, again, you can totally be pre-med, and and again, there's some some people who suggest, it's a good thing to be like an art major who also it takes all the pre-med courses, right? Makes you a little bit different. The problem with that a little bit is fitting it all in. And many of us, many students have financial aid. And, how do you fit all these electives in into your coursework? And so one of the ways that I'll encourage you to think about it at Johnson & Wales is to think about doing a chemistry minor. All right. So if you do a chemistry minor, financial aid will help cover the cost. All right. And a chemistry minor, so we have students who are biomedical engineers and psychology majors. They do the chemistry minor, and now you have essentially financial aid helping to cover the cost of these 4 classes, and even biochemistry, right? So it's something to think about. So I will encourage you to look into that if you're an undergrad here at Johnson & Wales and doing the pre-med and not a biology major and or potentially a health science major. And also, a chemistry minor is just a nice feather in your cap. So there you go. In addition to taking those courses, you're going to have to take some, I think most of you are taking these are kind of the standard non-science courses that are required for medical school. We can see it here in the top row. A full 2 semesters of English, 1 semester at least of statistics, or biostats, the same comparable courses. And then you're going to also need to get through calculus. All right. And then you're required to take a psychology. There's actually a fair amount of psychology now on the MCAT. All right. So those are the required courseworks for most schools in terms of being pre-med. So make sure you go ahead and you're taking advantage of all that. All right, so I want to go back to the sheet that hopefully you have access to. Again, there's a link here for that. I will encourage you also to look at these links that are through the American Association of Medical Colleges and also DO schools. So doctorate of osteopathy medicine is a great way to go. And it's very similar to MD, which is somewhat, sometimes referred to as allopathic medicine. There are differences, and also in terms of acceptances, et cetera. So, start looking at that early on so that you understand it. I have a couple friends actually who are, DOs, and they've had incredible careers at various hospitals. Anyway, so just look at the differences and similarities between those. All right, so, get it after you've got an idea of what courses to take and whether or not, may or may not, think about DO versus MD. One of the things I talked about in the overview video is shadowing. So make sure you are getting some experience with actual MDs. Following them around is harder in the age of COVID to actually gain access to hospitals and doctors. So you want to start early. So if you have family, friends, that's a good place to start. And again, if you can't get it in the age of COVID, something that you can do is to interview them online. You could do a Zoom meeting, you could do it on the phone, over coffee, et cetera. And they might be more open to that. So it's, again, less time and it's not quite as ideal, but it'll start getting you towards those 20 hours that you really should try to get with shadowing. All right. If you do plan on going the DO path, or if you want to keep the DO path open, I will highly encourage you to find one of those as well and shadow with at least one. So again, at least having a meeting with them so that you understand the similarities and differences of the DO path. It's going to be required, actually, if you do apply to DO school, that you've actually shadowed or met with a DO. All right, so get started early on that. I will encourage you, if you are an undergrad at Johnson & Wales, to maybe consider joining the pre-health club. So if you can email me and I can help refer you to whom you should contact. And we often are getting MDs and DOs and nurse practitioners and PAs to come and talk to our group, and it counts as shadowing hours. So it's a really good little thing to do. And so anyway, so start early on that. Christmas breaks are good. So anyway, I think you guys got the general idea. I will highly encourage you to continue volunteering. So hopefully you did some volunteering in your high school experiences and keep that going. It's not just good for your soul, it's good for, of course, applications. There's literally a box they'll have to check off that says, have they continued to be a part of the community? And so that's a big important thing. If you're an athlete, one thing you can consider is volunteering as a coach, or at least supporting other coaches in little children's leagues. I know we have some students who are athletes who volunteered for groups that are have disabilities in that sport. So that's something to think about, Special Olympics, et cetera. We have students who have volunteered online in the age of COVID. It's a little bit harder to get sometimes volunteering experience. Again, I will encourage you to look at crisis centers online. They can actually train you to be a crisis volunteer. All right, Greek life is great. Religious groups you can often do. And then if you go to that overview video, I also talk about how tutoring, volunteer tutoring and volunteering in hospitals is another great idea. All right. Yeah, and look at some of these blogs and websites for pre-meds, and they often have a lot of good suggestions. All right, but you also, all of these start early. And don't overextend yourself so that you don't do well in your classes. As we've talked about before, honestly, mastering your coursework is the most important thing. And then, the icing on top is doing all of this other stuff and getting it done in a timely manner. Something that's not required is patient contact care for med school, but many students who are successful in gaining acceptance do. So start thinking about that. I talked about that actually in the overview video, and some really good options, of course, for pre-meds or EMTs, CNAs, medical assistants, and looking more in the back of the house, doing actual clinical stuff with the patients and getting some expertise in that. Medical scribe is great, phlebotomy is great. So anyhow, start looking into that. And oftentimes, many times actually, if you're an undergrad, if you've gained access to one of these positions, you can use that for internship credit. So that often, for at least the biology majors, is typically once they have junior status. And so that's something to be thinking about and talking to your major advisor about, and also your SAS advisor. All right. And then even if you're not using it for internship credit, it's always good to talk and reach out to experiential learning, because they're pretty amazing at helping you guys to, find more ways in which you can get actual real life experience. One of my prior students who's actually interviewing for medical school right now in Canada, she was able to get an internship where she was working at a rehab facility for people who had neurological injuries. So it was an amazing experience for her. And she ended up doing that through JWU internship and getting a lot of credit for it, and also having some really impactful experiences. Something that I will highly encourage you to do if you are also pre-med is scientific research. All right, it's really quite important actually for you all to do that if you can. Not everybody's able to, but if you can, if you hear of opportunities that exist, go ahead and take part of them, even if they're not necessarily related to medicine. You're gaining insight into the scientific method. And again, it's a good feather in your cap and can also lead to other positions after college that we'll talk about in a second. All right, so it's a great thing. And again, you can hopefully possibly get internship experience from it. You may also want to just contact experiential learning here at JWU, because they can sometimes help place you into more of a research type job. We've had a lot of students who actually did research projects with Lifespan, and they were great and got papers out of them, and et cetera. It's just really good. All right. Now, the other thing I wanted to really touch base with you about is some of the specifics about being pre-med. When you think about what schools to apply to, I'm just going to be really honest with you. You have your best chance and the most affordable chance of going to an in-state public school, and specifically an in-state school that you have residency at. So that means that you are claiming, or somebody is claiming income taxes in that state on your behalf, or for you are claiming income state taxes for. So for instance, if you are just a student in Rhode Island, but your parents claim you on their income state taxes in New York State, obviously you are a New York State resident, and continue. That's actually a pretty good state. There are some states that have more medical schools, state medical schools, than others. New York State is one of those. Texas has a lot of them. California has a lot of them. So just start looking around. You can, again, go to start looking at the different medical colleges that are out there and seeing what's available. And again, in state where you are a resident, and there's some frequently asked questions about that down below that I kind of go into more detail, because sometimes this is challenging, understanding how state residency is established. All right, and especially if you're going to take a gap year. So there's some information. All right, so one of the big things, of course, is to have your driver's license in that state, be paying taxes in that state. And if your parents are divorced, and you have one in one state and one in another state, again, it's the parent that claims you on their income state taxes. And then you may start filing as an independent after you graduate from college, and then just be strategic. Honestly, if students move to specific states that have an abundance of medical schools during their gap years in order to improve their chance. We had a student actually who did that, moved to Tennessee, and got a research assistant job at Vanderbilt. And she was doing that largely to improve her chances of getting accepted to Tennessee state schools. And they're much more affordable. So there's a strategy involved. So, start thinking about that. Unfortunately, Rhode Island actually doesn't have a state medical school. So again, that's one of the reasons why you might want to consider being strategic if you are a Rhode Island resident. We do actually, Rhode Island residents have a certain number of spots that are reserved for them at Brown, but they go obviously pretty quickly. And then also, if you're a Rhode Island resident and you apply to UConn, I will encourage you to do that. Your tuition is about half off. I think it's either half off or 1/3 off. It's the out of state cost. UMass, it's I think half price. So they have a consortium of New England state schools. So since Rhode Island doesn't have a state medical school, that's kind of how they do deal with that. So here's just some information. Again, if you speak Spanish fluently, you may want to consider applying to Puerto Rican medical schools. There's a number of actually really good ones in Puerto Rico. One of my best friends, actually, she did that in college, and she went to Yale for her residency. So they're great schools. They're part of the American system, obviously, and they are accredited. So something to think about. There are also programs in the Caribbean that have lower entrance criteria. Just be a little bit cautious about any of those other ones. Making sure they're accredited or that they prepare their students for the board exams if you're planning on coming back to practice in the United States. They're quite expensive typically, so a little bit dicey sometimes. But I've known people who have done that in Guam. I actually had a friend who went to Guam for medical school, and he ended up, I think he's now a dermatologist. So anyhow, in the United States, so something to think about. There is a little bit of legwork that you'll need to do when you decide where you're going to apply and honestly what state you want to be a resident of. All right, if we go back up here, I apologize, I'm jumping back a little bit. We also want to be thinking about the MCAT. So the MCAT is a pretty intensive exam that covers a lot of the core science classes that you're going to need to take. So there's a ton of general chemistry, a lot of organic chemistry, there's a lot of biochem, a lot of physiology, biology as well. So that's why many people I talked about in the previous video, opt to take gap years, right? So I will highly encourage you just to plan on taking at least 1 to 2 years of a gap in between your undergraduate degree and graduate degree, unless you have if you have gone incredibly quickly through your prerequisites and gotten to all these courses so that you take your MCAT early. You would honestly need to take your MCAT in your junior year in order to be eligible to apply straight out of college. And most of our students, the way that the curriculums kind of go is that most students don't start taking chemistry until a little bit later after they've gotten their math backgrounds boned up. So just that's something I've talked about before in the other video. Again, the average age for acceptance into medical schools in the United States as of 2020 was 24 years old. And many students, I have a number of medical students who live across the street from me. Many of them were 27 when they started medical school at Brown. So it is, again, not a race to get through college and medical school. And I will just encourage you to be the best candidate you possibly can be. And in order to do that, you need to get through all of, most of your coursework. Let me pause this just a second. Sorry about that. So again, in order to get through the MCAT, you need to have usually gotten through, all of the required coursework and much of the suggested coursework. And so that is going to often cause you to take it after you graduate or in your senior year or something towards the end. Here we can see sort of the basic timeline for application process. The MCAT really is going to require that you've studied quite extensively. There are courses that we talked about in the other video that you should plan on taking, or just doing an extensive amount of studying on your own. And again, there's no calculator allowed on the MCAT, so there's a lot of like getting the timing down so that you want to have that in your back pocket and be really confident when you take the exam. There is a limit on the number of times that you can take the MCAT, and you can look that up if you want. And so that's why we want to be kind of, most people will take it once and do okay, and then often retake it that same year, and that's totally kosher. I think they try to discourage you from taking it more than 3 times in a given calendar year, if I remember correctly, but you might want to look that up. So again, about 2 years in advance of you hoping to matriculate into medical school, again, most medical schools are going to start in the summer, the late summer of a particular year. So for instance, if you were planning on hoping to start medical school in July 25, that means that in July 23, you need to start studying. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So you need to start studying in July 23 and then plan on taking the MCAT in the winter of 23-24. Hopefully that makes sense. So either in January of 24 then. So you can see how that kind of works out. And then that gives you enough time to potentially retake it in time for your application, which we can see down here. The application portal opens in May of each year. It's called AAM's, the AMCAS portal, the American Association of Medical Colleges, I think. It opens in May, and the best candidates, the people who have the highest chances of getting accepted, are going to get their applications in early, right? I can't say this kind of loudly enough. So I would have, many schools will tell you to have them done by June of the year prior to you hope to get matriculate into medical school. So if we're using, again, the July 25 example for starting medical school, you would want to have yours in by July 24 at the apps, really early. So again, people who get theirs in August, even September, you're starting to get buried. They literally are going to start going through these applications, first come, first serve, and you want to have them in early. And the first time applicants are going to be viewed first. All right. So the first time early applicants get looked at by medical colleges by and large first, and get the best interview slots. So again, takeaways from this is you want to start early, having all this sort of experience that we discussed. And also when you do actually do your application and hopefully get your MCATs all done, you want to go ahead and submit those early and once, right? It's an expensive process. So you don't want to apply, I think, until you're actually a solid candidate, because you will then get looked at later. So again, this is why many students are going to take at least 1 to 2 years of gap years, and even more, right? Plenty of students start medical school later in their life, and in some ways they have an advantage because the medical schools recognize that they're a little bit more of a mature candidate who is doing this, for themselves. All right, so hopefully that's making sense in terms of looking at this timeline. We've talked about how recommendations are going to be. That you need to get several of these recommendations and ask your recommenders early in advance so that they're not, especially if you're asking them they're going to get a form from AMCAS after you've submitted your application. So if you submit your application, say in June of, the year prior to you hope to start medical school and you've gotten all your stuff all done, then after you've submitted everything, they're going to send a link to your recommenders to do the recommendation. So you just want to make sure that your recommenders are actually going to be around in that summer so that they can actually do your recommendation in a timely manner. Because again, the medical schools are not going to start looking at your application until they've gotten all of your stuff, your transcripts, your grades, everything's been authenticated. And then they're going to look at your recommendations as well that hopefully your recommenders have given them. So if your recommender is out of the country or not checking their email over the summer, which does happen, it's going to delay your whole process. So something to be thinking about. All right. Hopefully you'll get everything in, and you're going to get asked to do secondary responses. So there's often a number of essay questions that they're going to ask you about different details of your life. Every medical school is a little bit different in those. And so that's in addition to the personal statement that you've provided in your AMCAS application. As I mentioned before, start thinking about that personal statement early. Why do you want to be a doctor? You can actually look up the number of words that are typically used in some examples of those. And again, the interviews are usually going to be in the fall to winter to spring. Again, the better candidates are going to get the better interview slots more in the winter time, the early time period. So again, that's why we want to have our application in quite early. Down below, again, here are some just other important frequently asked questions and suggestions. I will encourage you to document all of your volunteer work, all of your shadowing, all of the hours that you work as an EMT, et cetera. All of that stuff needs to be documented. If you're lucky enough to do some research projects, document it, have something that you're going to be able to then use for your AMCAS application later on down the road. You're going to pay, we mentioned this before, I want you to pay particular importance. Sorry about that. So as we were talking about BCPMs, again, biologies, chemistry, physics, and math, make sure, unfortunately, health science courses or regular science courses like environmental science, et cetera, they do not count actually in your BCPM calculation. So so take it for what it is. If you are going to retake courses to try to increase your GPA, again, it's usually better to take biologies, the chemistries, the physics, and the math just to increase that GPA value, because the BCPM is one of the more important barometers that they're going to use. And again, so I will also encourage you to, if you're thinking about taking courses during the summer or at other universities, that's obviously fine. It's something to think about because it can help you progress a little quicker. Try to avoid online. Don't take any online lab courses. They will not be accepted. The only caveat for that is during the COVID crisis that they are being allowed by medical schools. So again, just don't take any online labs because medical schools, by and large, are not going to accept them. Community college courses with labs can often be great and work. Just be a little bit, don't plan on taking all of these courses at a community college because many schools will not deem them, quote unquote, as rigorous as maybe a university. They're a little bit snobby about that. So, many times you can take one or two courses at a community college with lab, and it's going to be fine. You might want to check with the schools that you plan on applying to make sure that that's kosher. But I would not plan on taking all of them. Some students, consider doing that, and that's not the best course of action. All right, at all. An AP credit is 99% of the time allowed for a specific course requirement, but you should check at your specific school just to make sure, because there can be some sort of variation. Many students, though, who have gotten AP credit actually go ahead and retake the course in undergraduate. And I will kind of encourage you to do that because, again, especially for like chemistry or whatnot or physics, there is so much of it on the MCAT that you really want to be mastering it. So anyway, take it for what it is. As much as the AP scores are great, it doesn't necessarily demonstrate mastery sometimes of the subject at the level that is going to be required for the MCAT. And again, to make sure that that BCPM is strong, if you're an undergrad and you're early on, tutoring, really. We have had many of our best students go to tutoring on a religious basis, and that's why they are our best students. So it is not just for students who are struggling at all. They can help you to do practice problems, et cetera, and just to check in. I will also consider, if you do poorly in a class, especially for med school, if you get a C or below, something to think about is retaking it, right? There's some, you might want to talk to your financial services advisor to see if there's any impact on your financial aid or cost, et cetera. But that can often help be a boon for you. For instance, if you got like a C in organic chemistry, which sometimes happens, right, often happens, and you retake it to get an A, right, the school is going to see both of those grades and they kind of average out in terms of your BCPM calculation. So something to think about. If you watch the video that I sent to you all, I mentioned quite aggressively that Johnson & Wales GPAs need to be converted to the standard AMCAS system. And so here's some information about that, as well as a calculator that's going to help you to calculate it yourself. Let me go and show you that to you actually really quickly. I think it's hopefully going to link properly. Let's see, hopefully I got it linked. Let's see. Oh dear, why is that syncing? All right, I'm not going to keep spending time on that. If for some reason it's not linking properly on your end, just email me and I can send you a copy. So it's just a calculator that you're going to put your various different grades in, whether or not you took them to a quarter. Because remember, Johnson and Wales prior to 2020, we were in the quarter system. And so you need to adjust the quarters for semesters to make sure everything's equivalent. And then also you're going to be, putting your pluses and whatnot in. For instance, if you get a B plus, as I said before, it's going to drop down to a 3.3 in the standardized system from the Johnson Wheel 3.5. All right. But again, if we don't have minuses at Johnson and Wales, so you're kind of blessed by that. All right. Here are some statistics about GPAs that you should be shooting for. And again, the acceptance rates are very low for most medical schools. So just take that for what it's worth. Here's also more information about the MCAT and some study suggestions that I have for that. The goal is to get around an 80th percentile or above to be kind of in a decent competitive place. Doesn't mean that you can't get in if you have less than a 510. It's just that's kind of the goal that we're going for. All right. Yeah. All right. Let's keep looking. We talked about patient contact care in the overview video. Again, these are not required, but these are often very good suggestions of things that students do to make themselves better candidates. I've talked also extensively about gap years. It is the norm for medical school now that you take a 1 to 2 to even more gap years. This is the same for PA and other programs. It's a very competitive pool and you want to make yourself the best candidate possible. If your parents or family members do not understand this, right? They came from a different generation. I can talk to them. I'm happy to do so if you give me clearance to do so. This is just how it is. They can look at any online forum and they will say the same thing. So just there you go. It's unless you had extensive credit coming into college or you're flying through your undergraduate prerequisites, it is the norm to take a gap years. All right. Again, I've mentioned also that applications should be done early and you should, again, not apply until you're actually good. Sometimes students want to just like roll the dice and see what happens. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you should be confident that you are a decent candidate before you actually put all that money and effort to apply. Because again, they are going to look at the first time applicants over the second time or third time applicants. Okay. We've talked about state residencies and establishing state residency because those are your best bets. You can also consider applying to international programs. That's not a bad idea. I know I have friends who went to McGill University in Canada and did great there. It's a private institution in Canada that's very highly regarded. And they were, of course, able to move back to the United States and pass their boards and all that good stuff. All right. Here is some information about if you are not quite yet the best candidate after graduation, right? Some students are kind of in that gray area and they wonder how they can become better. All right. So again, consider taking more courses, retaking some courses. There's also post-bac medical programs. They're kind of expensive. So be careful, but you can start Googling them and you'll find them. We have actually several students that are doing that right now. And if you successfully get through those programs, sometimes they guarantee you an interview with an associated medical or DO school. So that's pretty great. They'll also help you to study for the MCAT and get some experiences and do some research. It's great. There's also some students, believe it or not, actually go on to do a master's or even another graduate degree in an associated field. Like biology or biochemistry or epidemiology, et cetera. Public health is another good one. So that is, again, another big feather in your cap, and hopefully you'll get more research experience and hopefully some publications that'll help you to stand out in the incredibly impressive pool of people that are applying to medical school. We talked already about the chemistry minor. Here's a link for that. And again, here, if you are looking for other coursework after college, that's not necessarily part of a master's program, et cetera, or a post-bac program. I've had some good luck with students taking classes some various different programs if you have any questions. And then also we have at Johnson & Wales a post-bac certification program that some of you actually might even be in, that is allowing you to continue to take the biochemistries, the genetics, and some of those other courses that you may not have gotten in your undergraduate. So it's something to think about, especially if you're a non-science major, how to get all this coursework in. I hope I talked about everything that's kind of relevant. And again, I went to a great amount of effort to make sure that this sheet had almost everything I know about the process and when it needs to happen. So your homework now is to look over this and also to find out more information on your own. All right. Again, if any of the links aren't working, just reach out to me and I can send them to you. Hopefully we'll be getting them up on a website shortly. Best of luck.